Good morning. Reading your book, which already contains much theoretical work, one stumbles over the definition of personhood right at the beginning. It is extraordinarily technical and abstract. I will read it here as an introduction. Person or personhood, here, was used as a technical term that defined any entity with the quality of liberty, from which the ability to discursive performance arises and which distinguishes it as a subject from objects. In order to distinguish it from objects, you simply define a person by its quality, as being free and able to discourse. Could we say, if it speaks, it's a person?
Almost, because some computers also do speak. Discursiveness is a form of interaction which implies the ability of empathy with the audience, as distinct from a mere programmed behavior. Further, it had to be emphasized that the idea of speaking leads often to the misconception that discursiveness is somehow related to human language or grammar, which is not the case. It simply means that the person is an entity which interacts with others in a structured way which could be understood by both. I call this structure stories, based on Phillips and Huntley's assumption on stories as expression of a universal mental structure.
I assume that there are many other definitions you could have used, not all of which would pivot around liberty.
You're certainly right. For the purpose of today's session, I have specifically prepared a few definitions I discovered related to the Western culture. Interestingly, the English word person was used to translate two very different concepts: hypostasis and prosopon. Hypostasis is the underlying state or underlying substance of things as a kind of unifying mechanism. Paulina Remes' work on consciousness and Neoplatonism is of greatest interest in relation to this conception. Prosopon, in turn, means self-manifestation. We find this in Grillmeyer. This manifestation of the self goes far beyond our understanding of the person, including everything that makes up one's personal identity. The English term, thus, joins two aspects of personhood: what the person is in itself, as the German idealist would say, and how the person appears to the world, as in Husserlian phenomenology. In the Roman word persona, however, the first meaning seems rather to be lost. It only refers to the use of the Greek prosopon in theater theory as the mask of a character on a stage, the appearance of the person as a mean through which one acts, but not the acting entity behind it. If we abandon the Occidental philosophy, we find other aspects. There is a close relative to the Greek hypostasis in the Sanskrit concept of prakriti. It is no longer the being in itself or even only a mask. It is much more the original cause, the creative source of existence. A much more pragmatic but not less philosophical approach could be found in animist cultures. According Graham, the person is a discursive entity and inherently linked to a story. This seems closer to the Greek prosopon. My own understanding of personhood is mainly based on this last approach. While exploring the phenomenon of personhood, I used to get stick with the strong persistence of the equivalence between the concept person and the human being as a species. Surprisingly, wherever I found such approaches, not only in Western philosophy, it was never concluding, explained, why there should be such an analogy. Later I realized that there was a connection between this idea and the general anthropocentric worldview, which I did not share. Such anthropocentrism was expressed in definitions of the person as the one here by Harry Frankfurt. I cite, "The criteria for being a person are designed to capture those attributes which are the subject of our most human concern with ourselves and the source of what we regard as most important and most problematical in our lives." Even though I'm not very sympathetic with the anthropocentric approach, my personal opinion was not my major concern. But when you read Frankfurt's quote, it becomes clear that you have either to adopt a relativist philosophical view, or you had fully to give up any hope to solve such questions like the search for liberty as a universal principle. It was simply too vague from a technical point of view. We have to consider that the concept as the one of being human can only be explored analytically if we have a higher category. As such, when defining the human being as a species, the Homo sapiens sapiens, we have to organize it within the larger family of Hominidae, the order of primates, the class of Mammalia, the phylum Chordata, and lastly the kingdom of Animalia as part of living beings. In a similar way, the person had to be defined categorically in order to make it possible to explain why only human beings should be persons, or if there could, at least in theory, be also other kinds of persons. This brings us back to the problem addressed in the last session about a priorism and the need to change the primary category as perpetual becoming, in other words, liberty. Being was a closed performance, something static, which consequently led to the isolated individual, which since the 18th century was often associated with Robinson Crusoe. In this view, the person only transcended time and space, but was not intersubjective. As a result, the other person was always a potential threat to one's own existence, a source of conflict which was conceived as problematic. Thus, political theory in the Lockean tradition tried to mitigate this potential of conflict through contracts, and was very sensitive to the idea of coercion. Only if we understand persons in a subject transcendent way, we can get a different view on conflicts as interpersonal encounter, which manifests this a priori of liberty in personhood as a source of creation, namely the creation of one's own self.
Conflicts as creative source. This sounds promising. We will dedicate our next session to this idea and how you link your view on personhood with the concept of universal rights.
Yes, we will see.